This is Biology 2, Chapter 17 on Organizing Life's Diversity. In this portion of the video lecture, we will be taking a look at the history of classifying life. Basically, what we do when we classify things is we group them together based on basically what they have in common. So classification is grouping organisms based on a certain set of criteria or rules. There are lots of living things on this planet, and even very, very early on there was an awareness of a need to start to organize these living things and figure out kind of where we as people were in the whole scheme of life. The very first man to at least document his efforts at classification was Aristotle. He developed the very first system of biological classification. It was not very complete. It had a lot of loopholes and a lot of gaps. Aristotle clearly recognized that most things around him, Aristotle was a Greek philosopher mostly, not so much on the scientist side, but he did have enough background to understand that everything that was living around him in the general Mediterranean area was either a plant or an animal. So that was the first step that he would ask. If he would see some unidentified something that he didn't know what it was, his first step he would ask, is it a plant or an animal? So then the next step is, if it was an animal, he asked, does the animal have red blood? For example, insects do not have red blood. They have more different bodily fluids. So then he would ask, what types of habits or behaviors did that animal have, and what's its body shape? So here on the slide we have three different animals. They do have some things in common, but they are from different areas, if you will, of the animal kingdom. So we basically have a dog, a cat, and a bird. However, Aristotle would have grouped them all in the same area because simply they were animals and they had red blood. Now, beyond that, there's a lot of differences in ways that these animals behave, hunting behaviors, scavenging behaviors, nesting behaviors in the case of the bird. But for Aristotle's time, it was kind of good enough. Plants, same thing. He asked really what to categorize and classify plants. He asked what the plant's size was. Size is never a good way to classify objects, because plants, just like anything else, has a variety of sizes even for one particular species. So then Aristotle would ask, well, what's the structure? Is it more of a tree-like plant, a shrub-like plant, or an herb or a grass-like plant? Again, this leaves a lot of loopholes, but for the year approximately 2 BC, give or take, the classification scheme was good enough. And Aristotle's classification scheme literally lasted for many hundreds of years before this guy came along, Carl Linnaeus. He developed the science of taxonomy, which is the science of identifying, naming, and then classifying species. It is not the science of doing your taxes. Linnaeus developed a much more specific system of naming organisms. For example, we have these three birds here on this slide. Aristotle would have put them in one category. To Aristotle, a bird was a bird was a bird. But Linnaeus recognized that there were different subgroups within the bird family, if you will. We can have owls and raptors and birds of prey. We can have things like finches and robins and blue jays, perching birds or songbirds. Then we have those birds that spend a little bit of their time on land and then a little bit of their time in water, like flamingos and ducks. So you have the wading birds. He realized that everything was going to need a specific name. And so what Carl Linnaeus developed was binomial nomenclature. It's a really big, weird word, but if you split it up into its Latin roots, you'll understand what it means. Bi, of course, means two. Nomial is referring to a name, and nomenclature means naming system. So binomial nomenclature is a two-named naming system. So every species has a two-part scientific name. The first part of the scientific name is what we call the genus. Another way to think of the word genus is like genre. The second part of the scientific name is the very species-specific name. Nothing else on the planet will have the same species-specific name. So for humans, of course, our genus is Homo, and our species-specific name is sapien. So we are Homo sapien. So everything that has been identified has a two-part scientific name. Binomial nomenclature is based on the Latin language, as is most science. Latin is what we call a dead language. It's not really officially spoken anymore, except for perhaps the Vatican. So the meanings of Latin words don't change over time. This way that we can assure that, for example, the word crow will remain the same and it won't change its meaning into, society kind of developing and changing over the years and adding on a different meaning to that word, making it fairly confusing. Also, if everything has an actual scientific name, then we can also use the common name to kind of tie that in together. Common names can be different in different areas of the world. So again, this binomial nomenclature in Latin will assure that these organisms that have been identified, their name meaning will not change. So taxonomy is what we call part of a hierarchy, a hierarchal system. Every category kind of is contained within another. So you can describe any living thing on the planet from a very broad perspective all the way down to a very specific perspective. So here we can take a look at the different divisions. We have up at the top the two different species of the American black bear and the Asiatic black bear. Now, they belong to the same domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and genus. Now, the reason why they are two-sided on the species is because the American black bear's scientific name is Ursus americanus, and the Asiatic black bear's name is Ursus tibetanus. So again, bears are very common. They may even look very similar. But if they are a different species, they will have a species-specific name. So everything in taxonomy kind of fits into another category. It's kind of like those Russian nesting dolls, where the big mama doll comes apart, and then there's a little one, and you take that apart, and there's another little one inside that, and so on, until you get the teeny tiny doll. So the large doll would, for example, be like a domain. The next largest doll would be a kingdom, etc., etc. So we're going to talk about the different divisions. A taxon, or if it's plural, a taxa, is a named group of organisms. And the genus or genre is a group of species that are closely related and they share a common ancestor. If you think of, for example, movies, there's lots of different genres of movies. There's comedies, there are dramas, there are horror films, there are suspense films, action films. Those are all different types of genres. So we have here three bears. On the very left, we have the American black bear. In the middle, we have the Asiatic black bear. And on the very right, we have the African sloth bear. So you can see that they are all bears, so they do have the same genus of Ursus. But if you were to guess which two of these three were more closely related, you would pick out the Asiatic black bear and the sloth bear. You can see they both have the nice little V-neck collar of fur. The sloth bear on the very, very right has very kind of coarse and kinked hair. It also has very long claws, but it's very different from the American black bear. So if we're kind of talking about, the general tree of life, the Asiatic black bear and the sloth bear would be sitting closer together on the genus branch for the bears. A family then contains related genera. And as we go further up, orders contain related families, and a class contains related orders. So now we are getting less specific as we go along. The phylum contains related classes. A kingdom contains related phyla, and the largest category of taxonomy is the domain, which contains one or more kingdoms. This has been part 1 of chapter 17 on organizing life's diversity.